The blizzard slammed into Chicago like a freight train out of hell. Wind screamed between the skeletal remains of old buildings, and snow whipped through the streets in white, blinding sheets. Inside a small shelter cobbled together from scrap wood and plastic tarps, Jackson Johnson, 52 years old and bone-tired, sat shivering under a blanket that had seen better decades. Through a slit in the plastic, he saw headlights slice through the storm, then the screech of metal. A motorcycle lost control and crashed into a snowbank just 20 feet away. Jackson's heart lurched as the rider flew and hit the ground hard, unmoving. The only sound afterward was the relentless moan of the wind. His breath came out in misty bursts. He hadn't eaten in 3 days. Fever burned through his chest like wildfire, every cough scraping his lungs raw. The thermometer on his old wristwatch blinked 20 below zero. That man outside wouldn't survive an hour in this cold. Jackson stared at his trembling hands. His stomach cramped, his head swam. He'd already fought for his life just to stay warm. Now he faced an impossible choice: stay inside and live, or step out into death to save a stranger. But this wasn't the first time Jackson Johnson had stared death in the face. 3 days earlier, he'd woken to the sound of coughing, his own. Blood flecked the threadbare blanket he pressed to his mouth. His little shelter in a forgotten lot on the south side barely kept out the wind. Yet, despite the freezing air and the gnawing hunger, Jackson's movements were precise. Fold the blanket military style. Arrange supplies. Clean what little there was. Discipline was all he had left. Next to his makeshift pillow sat a small wooden box. Inside lay his purple heart medal, the last symbol of who he used to be, a soldier who'd crawled through Afghan dust and fire, who'd carried his brothers out of burning vehicles while bullets split the sky. That medal wasn't just metal and ribbon. It was blood and memory. Now those same hands struggled to open a can of soup. Jackson tried again that morning. He visited Morrison Construction, his 24th job application in 2 months. The receptionist barely looked at him. Her eyes swept over his worn boots and faded jacket. "We'll call you if anything opens up," she said, already turning away. The door closed softly behind him. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Warm lights, busy people, steaming food. He passed restaurants whose smell alone could break a starving man's heart. To them, he was invisible. At 52, Jackson felt like a ghost haunting his own city. He made one last stop at the Veterans Affairs office. "Housing lists still backed up," said Mrs. Patterson, her tone gentle but exhausted. 47 names ahead of you. "What about job placement?" Jackson asked quietly. "Suspended. Budget cuts." He nodded, thanked her, and left. Walking back, he passed Miller's pawn shop, the neon sign flickering like a heartbeat in the fog. "We buy gold, silver, metals." He'd walked past that sign for years, always pretending it wasn't there. But this time he stopped. His reflection in the window looked like someone else, thin, sunken-eyed, fading. His hand went to the wooden box in his pocket. The Purple Heart, his last possession of worth, his last memory of pride. He couldn't do it. Not yet. By nightfall, the city news blared warnings. Blizzard approaching, historic cold incoming. Jackson reinforced every panel of his shelter, sealing cracks with plastic and duct tape. He'd built better structures in war zones, and he'd survive this too. That's what he told himself. But when the wind started howling like a living thing and the temperature fell to 20 below, even his confidence began to crack. His fever burned higher. His body shook uncontrollably. He pulled the blanket tight around himself and stared at the Purple Heart's reflection in the dim light. "You've seen worse," he whispered. "So have I." Outside, the world turned white. Then came the sound, the crash. Metal against concrete. A scream of tires. A final, terrible silence. Jackson staggered to his feet, coughing hard enough to see stars. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the chaos. The wind hit him like a punch. Every breath sliced his throat. Snow clawed at his face. 20 feet away, a dark shape lay sprawled beside a fallen motorcycle. Massive, motionless, half buried in snow. Jackson knelt, his fingers shaking as he checked the man's pulse. Weak but there. The man's lips were blue, his jacket soaked through and torn. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, freezing almost instantly. "Hey!" Jackson shouted over the wind. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. He looked back at his shelter, then down at the stranger. The storm howled, relentless. Logic screamed, "Leave him. You'll die too." But in the back of his mind, a voice whispered words he hadn't forgotten since Afghanistan. "Leave no one behind." He slid his arms under the man's shoulders and began to drag. The man was huge, at least 6'4" in solid muscle. Jackson's vision blurred with fever and exhaustion. His knees buckled in the snow. The stranger's weight felt like a mountain. Halfway to the shelter, Jackson collapsed. His lungs seized. He coughed blood into the snow. For a moment, he thought about letting go, just lying down beside the stranger and letting the cold take them both. But then he saw their faces, Martinez and Collins, the brothers he'd saved from a burning Humvee all those years ago. They stared at him in memory, their eyes saying what words never had to. He pushed himself up, one step, then another, then another. By the time he reached his shelter, Jackson could barely feel his hands. He laid the man inside and stripped off the frozen jacket, wrapping him in the only blanket he had. The biker's body trembled as warmth began to return. Jackson sat there in his thin undershirt, shivering violently. His breath came ragged and uneven. The man's pulse grew stronger. His color improved slightly. Jackson looked down at his purple heart again, the metal glinting faintly from the wooden box beside him. "You'd understand," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Sometimes saving someone else is the only way to remember you're still alive." The biker stirred faintly. "Sarah," he mumbled, his voice broken. "Tell Sarah. I'm sorry." Jackson's brow furrowed. Whoever Sarah was, she'd almost lost him tonight. He made up his mind. He would sell the metal. He would buy medicine, no matter the cost. Pulling on his soaked jacket, Jackson stepped back into the blizzard, the same storm that had already taken lives across the city. 6 blocks to Miller's pawn shop. 6 blocks through hell. But he made it through worse. Behind him, the stranger lay unconscious, unaware that his rescuer was trading away the last piece of his past to save him. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a quiet decision was about to change 2 lives forever. The pawn shop bell jingled weakly as Jackson Johnson stumbled inside, snow melting from his jacket onto the faded carpet. Behind the bulletproof glass, Eddie Miller looked up from his newspaper. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Jackson. Pale, feverish, shaking, eyes blazing with the kind of desperation that only comes from the edge of survival. "We're closed," Miller grunted, turning back to his paper. "Please," Jackson rasped, clutching the wooden box in trembling hands. "I need to sell something." With an impatient sigh, Miller buzzed him through the security door. "Make it quick. The storm's bad enough without babysitting." Jackson placed the box on the counter. Inside lay his purple heart medal, the one thing that had survived every battle of his life: Afghanistan, poverty, and now the storm. Its bronze shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights. "Afghanistan. 3 tours," Jackson said softly, voice breaking. "Pulled 2 Marines out of a burning Humvee in Kandahar." Miller didn't look impressed. He turned the medal over in his fingers. $50. Jackson froze. "What? 50? Market's full of these. Vets pawn them for drug money every day. I can't give you more." The number hit him harder than any bullet ever had. $50 for 3 years of war. $50 for blood, scars, and nightmares. But the image of the dying man in his shelter burned in his mind. "Deal," he whispered. Miller shrugged, handed him the cash, and turned back to his paper as if nothing sacred had just been broken. Jackson took the 50 and went straight to the small convenience rack. He grabbed antiseptic, gauze, painkillers, and antibiotics. $47. 3 left. The cash in his pocket felt like betrayal. The wind outside clawed at him as he left the shop. The storm howled like an angry god. Twice, the wind knocked him off his feet, sending him sprawling into snowbanks. He coughed blood, vision spinning. Somewhere in the blizzard, he saw them again, Martinez and Collins, walking beside him like ghosts from Kandahar. "You did the right thing," Martinez's voice echoed through the storm. "You always do, brother." Jackson stumbled forward, half conscious, half dead. The pawn shop's glow faded behind him, and the only light now came from his flashlight flickering weakly through the whiteout. When he finally reached his shelter, his lips were purple, his fingers numb, his body running on the last fumes of willpower. Inside, the biker still lay unconscious but breathing. Jackson tore open the antiseptic, his hands shaking as he cleaned the gash on the man's forehead. The smell of blood and alcohol filled the air. He worked methodically, every motion muscle memory from his years as a field medic. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was deep. Without treatment, infection could set in fast. Jackson crushed 2 antibiotic tablets, mixed them with water, and spooned it into the stranger's mouth. Then he wrapped his head with the gauze, every fold tight and precise, military precision, even now. When it was done, he sat back, dizzy, watching the man's breathing stabilize. The stranger was big, 6'4", maybe 250, his hand scarred like a man who'd fought hard and long. On his right forearm, Jackson noticed a faded tattoo of an eagle clutching a sword surrounded by symbols he didn't recognize. His jacket, though torn, was high-quality leather, custom-made. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just another drifter. Snow battered the walls, the plastic window shaking with every gust. Jackson huddled in a corner, his wet clothes freezing against his skin. His fever had turned into a blaze. Each breath came with pain, each cough spraying crimson into the air. He'd saved another man's life and might have doomed his own. Hours passed. The storm showed no mercy. The only sound inside was the labored breathing of 2 broken men. Then, somewhere past midnight, the biker groaned. His eyelids fluttered open, blue eyes, sharp and commanding even through pain. Jackson froze, startled. Where am I?" the man rasped. "My place," Jackson said, voice raw. "You crashed your bike in the storm. You were bleeding bad." The man blinked, scanning the shelter, the tarp walls, the duct-taped seams, the organized chaos. His gaze lingered on Jackson, shivering, sick, but alert. "And you brought me here? Couldn't leave you out there," Jackson said simply. "You'd be dead by now." The man's eyes softened slightly. "You military?" "Marine," Jackson replied. "A long time ago." The stranger nodded slowly. "Thought so. You carry yourself like one. Name's Thomas Morrison, but my brothers call me Steele." Jackson shook his hand. "Jackson Johnson." "Jackson," Steele repeated, testing the name. "You're one hell of a man." His gaze shifted to the empty patch of ribbon on the wall, the space where the Purple Heart once hung. "That yours?" Jackson followed his eyes and swallowed hard. "Was. Sold it tonight." Steele frowned. "Why?" "For your medicine." For a long time, the only sound was the wind outside. Then Steele said quietly, "You sold your Purple Heart for me?" Jackson coughed, pain flashing through his body. "You were dying?" "Didn't have a choice." Steele stared at him with something rare in his eyes, respect. "You don't even know who I am." "Doesn't matter," Jackson said. "We don't leave people behind." Steele exhaled slowly, running a hand through his tangled hair. "You're freezing. That your only blanket. You need it more than I do." Steele pulled the blanket tighter around himself for a second, then shook his head. "No, we share it." Jackson hesitated. Pride fought against exhaustion, but his body was shutting down, and pride wouldn't keep him alive. Under the single blanket, the 2 men huddled shoulder to shoulder. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the silence of men who'd seen too much. "Afghanistan?" Steele asked. "Yeah, 3 tours." "To myself," Steele said. "Lost good men there." Jackson's voice was a whisper. "Martinez and Collins. I was supposed to die instead." Steele nodded slowly. "Survivor's guilt's a hell of a thing. But they lived because of you. That matters." Outside, the storm roared on, shaking the city to its bones. But inside that fragile shelter, something began to thaw, a sense of brotherhood neither man had felt in years. They didn't know it yet, but this night would ripple far beyond the blizzard. It would ignite a chain of events that would shake the foundations of the city itself. Because when morning came, Steele Morrison, known to the world as one of the most powerful men in Chicago, would make a phone call that would change Jackson Johnson's life forever. But for now, there was only the storm, and two soldiers fighting to see the dawn. Gray dawn broke over Chicago, weak light bleeding through the storm clouds. The world outside looked like a battlefield of snow and silence. Inside the shelter, Jackson Johnson stirred awake to the sound of distant engines. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but the sound grew louder, deep, rumbling, synchronized. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. Steele was already sitting up, checking the bandage on his head with practiced calm. "That'll be my boys," he said, his tone shifting from weary to commanding. "They've been searching for me all night." Jackson blinked in disbelief as the first motorcycles pulled into the lot. Through the fog plastic, he saw three massive Harleys glinting with chrome. Their riders dismounted, heavy boots crunching through ice. The first, a bearded man built like a brick wall, spotted Steele and broke into a grin. "Steele, you son of a gun. We thought you were dead." Steele managed a half-smile. "Would have been, if not for him." He motioned to Jackson, who stood shivering in the doorway. "This man saved my life." The biker's laughter died immediately. Three pairs of hard eyes turned to Jackson, scanning his frail frame, his thin jacket, his hollow face. But something in Steele's voice, respect, not pity, made them look closer. "Found me unconscious," Steele continued. "Dragged me through the storm, patched me up, gave me the only blanket he had. Sold his Purple Heart for my medicine." A heavy silence followed. Then the bearded biker, Tank, extended a massive hand. "Any friend of Steele's is family to us." Jackson hesitated, then shook it. "Didn't do anything special," he said quietly. Steele's eyes softened. "You did everything that matters." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a black leather patch embroidered with silver thread, and pressed it into Jackson's hand. "Keep this. Might come in handy someday." Jackson turned it over. The patch was thick, expensive, stitched with symbols he didn't understand. An eagle's wings and a single word across the top, President. Before he could ask, Steele simply said, "Consider it a thank you." Moments later, the bikers fixed Steele's damaged Harley. When it roared back to life, the sound shook the air like thunder. Steele turned to Jackson one last time before putting on his helmet. "You ever need anything, find me, Thomas Morrison. People know how to reach me." Then, with a nod, he rode off, the other bikes following like a convoy of ghosts. Jackson stood alone in the snow, the patch clutched in his palm. He had no idea that the man he'd saved wasn't just Steele Morrison, but the president of Chicago's most feared motorcycle club. That afternoon, inside the warm light of the Chicago Public Library, Jackson typed the name slowly into a computer. Thomas Morrison Chicago Motorcycle. The results made his heart pound. The first headline from the Chicago Tribune read, "Hell's Angels president reported missing in blizzard." The photo left no doubt. It was Steele, flanked by 50 leather-clad bikers. Jackson scrolled down the article. Thomas Steele Morrison, decorated Canadian military veteran, president of the Chicago chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, commands the loyalty of over 200 members across the Midwest. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. He had saved one of the most powerful men in Chicago's underworld. Reaching into his pocket, Jackson pulled out the leather patch. Under the library's fluorescent lights, the silver thread glinted. The letters spelled, "Hells Angels Chicago, President." He swallowed hard. "What did you give me, Steele?" As if in answer, his old flip phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Storm's over. Club's riding again. Hope you're staying warm. Steele." Before he could react, Jackson noticed movement outside the library window. A lone biker sitting astride his Harley, engine idling, helmet hiding his face. Watching. Waiting. A chill ran down Jackson's spine. He stood, gathered his things, and left through the side exit. The motorcycle followed at a slow distance, never closing the gap. Whatever that patch meant, it wasn't just a souvenir. It was a signal. By morning, he'd have his answer. The next day dawned white and cold, the storm finally broken. But as Jackson sipped a cup of water, the low thunder of engines filled the air again, louder this time. He stepped outside and froze. 50 motorcycles rolled into the lot in perfect formation, engines rumbling like caged beasts. They formed a semicircle around his shelter. At the center, Steele Morrison dismounted, dressed in full Hell's Angels colors. This was not the man Jackson had rescued. It was the leader of an army. The rest of the bikers fell silent as Steele approached. "Morning, Jackson," he said, his voice carrying authority that commanded obedience. "Morning, Steele." Jackson tried to sound steady. "Quite the welcoming committee." Steele smiled faintly. "We need to talk." He turned to his men. "Brothers, I told you about a man who found me dying in a blizzard. A man who sold his Purple Heart to buy my medicine. A man who asked for nothing in return." The entire group listened, unmoving. "I found a pawn shop," Steele continued, pulling a small wooden box from his jacket. "Bought this back for $500. He opened it, revealing the Purple Heart, polished and gleaming. "This belongs to you." Jackson's breath caught. "Steele, I can't." "Shut up and take it," Steele said, smiling. "A man who earns this doesn't sell it. He shouldn't have to." Then Steele turned to his men. "Brothers, meet Jackson Johnson, Marine, hero, and from this day forward, under our protection." Murmurs rippled through the group. Respect, awe, disbelief. But Steele wasn't done. His expression softened as he met Jackson's eyes. "You saved my life, but it goes deeper than that." He paused, voice thickening. "In Afghanistan, I served with a Canadian unit. My best friend, Michael Collins, was killed saving me from an explosion in Kandahar." Jackson's knees almost gave out. "Collins, Sergeant Collins." Steele nodded. "He wrote home about an American Marine who pulled him out of that same Humvee. Said your name was Jackson Johnson." The world tilted. Steele's voice broke slightly. "Mike Collins was my brother-in-law. He was engaged to my sister, Sarah, the woman I kept mumbling about in the storm. You saved his life 13 years ago. And last week, you saved mine." Jackson stared at him, speechless. Steele placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're family now, brother. And family gets taken care of." He turned to his men. "We're building this man a home. A real one. Right here." The engines roared as the bikers scattered into motion. Within hours, trucks arrived carrying lumber, insulation, tools. A doctor named Rodriguez set up a tent to treat Jackson's pneumonia. By nightfall, his old shelter was gone, replaced by a foundation, blueprints, and 50 men working through the cold to build a future. Steele knelt beside him as Jackson rested under a heated blanket. "You'll never be hungry again, brother. Never be forgotten." And he meant it. 6 weeks later, where an old shack once stood, a log cabin gleamed under the winter sun. Solar panels, a porch, and a flagpole flying both the American and Canadian flags side by side. Jackson now worked as foreman for Morrison Construction, leading projects that built homes for other veterans. His cough was gone. His eyes shone with purpose. In his new office hung his restored Purple Heart, beside a photo of him and Steele, two soldiers from different worlds bound by one act of kindness. When reporters came calling, the story spread. Homeless veteran saves biker, transforms neighborhood. Donations poured in. The Jackson Johnson Foundation was born, housing dozens of veterans across Chicago. And every Sunday, 50 Hell's Angels thundered into his driveway for dinner. Brothers, not bikers. 1 year later, another storm hit Chicago. But this time, no one froze. Because of one man's decision to save a stranger. Because kindness, once sparked, never dies. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more thrilling, cinematic stories just like this one. Here's a quick question for you. If you found someone dying in the snow, would you risk everything to save them or walk away? Tell us in the comments below, because heroes aren't born in comfort. They're forged in the storm.